Trade buzz is back around the New York Giants. First, the league is watching Big Blue. Then, Joe Schoen has a real roster decision. And then, the one that changes everything, is whether one smart trade should happen before the season. By the end of this video, you will know exactly where I stand. Big Blue lock-in. The Giants are being included in league-wide trade scenario conversations, and that matters. Not because a deal is confirmed. Not because a player is already on the way. It matters because the rest of the league is looking at New York and saying, this roster is still moving. Real talk before we dive in. Eagles fans think the NFC East still belongs to them. Cowboys fans never stop talking. Commanders fans are loud again. If you want this channel, built by Big Blue and for Big Blue, to drown them out, hit subscribe right now. Every sub is a flag planted at MetLife Stadium. Comment, let's go Giants, so every rival fan lurking here feels it. Now let's get to the first story, because this is where the trade conversation starts. Breaking news from the roster conversation. The Giants trade buzz is heating up before the 2026 season, and that is not background noise. That is the kind of signal you pay attention to when a front office has already built a draft class around high-upside physical talent. Here is the early reveal. New York is being placed inside league-wide trade scenario conversations. That does not mean Joe Schoen is forced to make a move. It does not mean the Giants are desperate. But it does mean the league sees what we see. This team is not finished being shaped. The question is not, will the Giants make any random trade? That is lazy. The real question is, what kind of trade actually makes sense for Big Blue? Because after a draft built around traits, physicality, upside, and long-term growth, the Giants have to decide how much of the roster should be allowed to develop and how much needs immediate help. That is the tension. That is the fight inside the building. You have Jackson Dart as the current starting quarterback. You have a young core that the organization clearly wants to grow. You have a division where the Eagles, Cowboys, and Commanders are not sitting quietly. And you have a front office that has to decide whether patience is smart or whether patience becomes an excuse. Now, here is the truth nobody's telling you. Trade buzz only matters if it connects to a real need. A flashy move without a roster fit is noise. A targeted move that fills an immediate hole while still protecting the young core is team building. That is the difference between watching any channel and watching this one. This changes the season because it puts pressure on Joe Schoen. The Giants cannot just say, we like our guys, and expect Big Blue Nation to accept that forever. If the roster has a clear weakness, and if a smart trade is sitting there, then the front office has to be willing to act. Personal opinion here. I think the Giants should be open for business, but not reckless. That is the moderate take, and I stand by it. The draft added upside, but upside does not erase immediate roster needs. If you think patience is the smarter path, disagree below. I want the pushback. And that brings us to the second story. Because the trade buzz is only the surface. The bigger question is not whether New York is mentioned. The bigger question is whether Joe Schoen has the nerve to act before the season puts pressure on him. Now, this is what most channels miss. They hear trade scenario and immediately start fantasy shopping. That is not analysis. That is noise with a thumbnail. The real development is this. The Giants are being discussed as a team that may not be done reshaping the roster before the 2026 season. That phrase matters. Not done reshaping. That means the draft did not close the book. It opened the next chapter. The Giants added high-ceiling players, and that tells you the front office is betting on traits, development, and physical upside. But a roster built around upside still needs answers that can help right away. That is where Joe Schoen's decision gets dangerous. If he pushes too hard, he risks paying for a short-term patch that blocks development. If he waits too long, he risks sending Jackson Dart and this young core into the season with problems everybody already saw coming. That is the tightrope. And let's connect this to the NFC East. The supporting idea around this whole conversation is that the division could be unstable, especially if Philadelphia underachieves. That is not a small detail. That is the window. If the Eagles stumble, if the Cowboys keep doing Cowboys things, and if the Commanders hit turbulence, the Giants cannot be the team standing still. New York tough means recognizing the moment before everyone else admits it exists. This is not about chasing headlines. This is about recognizing that the division is not some locked vault. It can tilt. It can open. And when it opens, the teams that already made the right roster move are the teams that steal the year. I'll say it, and I know half of you will hate this. In my opinion, Joe Schoen should be aggressive if the trade fills an immediate hole. Not reckless. Aggressive. The draft was built for upside, but the season needs answers. If he sits on his hands, that is not patience. That is hiding. Tell me I'm wrong. Now I want your take. Comment aggressive if you want Schoen to chase the right trade now. Comment patient if you want the young core to develop without forcing it. No middle ground. Make me defend my position. Quick reminder. If you are still here, you are Big Blue for real. Hit subscribe, because story 3 is the one. What comes next is the whole video. The first story was trade buzz. The second was Schoen's decision. But the third story is the reason this conversation can change the Giants' entire outlook before the season even starts. Stay with me. Now, this is what you really came for. This is the part that flips the discussion from interesting rumor into front office pressure. The story I told you about at the start is here, and it is bigger than a generic trade mention. Because the Giants are not just floating around random speculation. A new NFL-wide trade scenario piece has the Giants included in potential roster-shaping moves before the 2026 season. There it is. That is the phrase, roster shaping. Not depth only. Not camp body conversation. Not background chatter. Roster shaping means the move would be viewed as something that changes how the team looks, how the team functions, and how the season is judged. And when Big Blue is included in that kind of conversation, the question becomes unavoidable. Should Joe Schoen be aggressive right now? Or should the Giants let this young core develop? That is the entire debate. And I love that debate, because both sides reveal something about how fans see this rebuild. The aggressive side says, the Giants still have needs. One smart trade can change the entire outlook of the season. If the division is unstable, and if Philadelphia underachieves, then New York should not wait around politely while the Eagles try to recover. The patient side says, the front office just added high-ceiling players in the draft. Let the talent grow. Do not trade away flexibility. Do not rush a roster that is being built around traits and upside. Both arguments are real, but only one wins for me. Before I give you that answer, connect the three stories. Story 1. Giants trade buzz is heating up before the season. Story 2. Joe Schoen has to decide what kind of move actually makes sense, because the roster still has needs. Story 3. The Giants have now appeared in league-wide trade scenario conversations involving potential roster-shaping moves. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. The front office is sitting in the middle of three forces. First, the young core needs development. Second, the roster still needs help in specific areas, even if the brief does not name those positions. Third, the NFC East may not be as stable as rival fans want you to believe. That is why this story matters. A smart trade is not just about adding a name. It is about timing. It is about knowing when your roster has enough young upside to protect the future, but enough immediate urgency to justify action. And Big Blue is exactly in that zone. This is where Joe Schoen earns the job. Not by winning a press conference. Not by sounding patient. Not by letting the market pass him by. He earns it by identifying the kind of move that helps the Giants now without betraying the plan he just built through the draft. If a trade blocks a high-upside player who needs snaps, I hate it. If a trade fills an immediate hole without crushing development, I love it. That is the line. Film don't lie. A roster built only on upside is unfinished. Upside is the future. Need is the present. The best front offices know how to serve both. And that is why the Eagles' angle matters so much. If Philadelphia underachieves, the division conversation changes fast. The Cowboys will sell noise. The Commanders will talk confidence. But the Giants have a chance to be the team that quietly makes the practical move, fixes the right problem, and walks into MetLife Stadium with a roster that makes more sense. That is New York tough. That is G-Men football. And that is exactly why I do not want passive management here. I'm going on record right now. In my opinion, one smart Giants trade before the season would be the best roster decision Joe Schoen can make. Not a reckless splash. Not a desperate swing. A precise move. The young core can still develop, but Jackson Dart should not have to carry avoidable roster problems. Tell me I'm wrong. I'll defend that all day. Now you have your answer to the question I asked earlier. Drop aggressive or patient in the comments, because this is the dividing line for Big Blue Nation. And if this analysis hit, like the video. That is how we keep the algorithm pushing real Giants breakdowns, not lazy rival noise. 3 stories. 1 picture. Here is what it all means together. The Giants are not acting like a finished product, and that is a good thing. The trade buzz says the league still sees New York as active. The development angle says Joe Schoen has a real decision after building through high-upside physical talent. The proof says a roster-shaping move is part of the conversation, and one smart trade can change the outlook of the season. That does not mean chase every name. It means target the right kind of help. The Eagles want everyone to believe the division still runs through them. The Cowboys want attention. The Commanders want respect. But Big Blue needs something better than hype. Big Blue needs the right move at the right moment. And that is the thesis. If the Giants believe the young core is close enough, they should not waste the window by being timid. If they believe the roster still has a hole that can be fixed without damaging the future, then Schoen has to move. Listen closely. The next video is going to break down what type of trade actually makes sense for the Giants, and which roster needs should be off limits from lazy fantasy talk. If you are Big Blue for real, you need that breakdown. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and make sure YouTube actually brings it to you. Drop your final answer below, aggressive or patient, because this is where the fanbase has to choose. Do you trust the young core to grow without another move? Or do you believe one smart trade is the difference between waiting and attacking? I already told you where I stand. I want Joe Schoen aggressive, targeted, and disciplined. That is not contradiction. That is how serious teams operate. But listen closely. One decision is still pending. The front office has not made the final call on how far it is willing to go in reshaping this roster before the season. That answer changes everything, because patience and aggression cannot both lead the room forever. And the rivals are watching. If Philadelphia underachieves, the door opens. If Dallas stays loud without answers, the door opens. If Washington stumbles, the door opens. The question is whether the Giants are ready to step through it. Big Blue, the battle is here. Subscribe, stay locked, and drop your final answer below. Aggressive or patient? Let's go Giants. We ride together.